This forecast is brought to you by me. For information on readings I offer, such as birth chart readings, couples readings, locational readings, and more, you can check out my website at manic.mercurian.net, or you can also reach out to me directly at manic.mercurian@gmail.com. And as always, all that information is in the description box below. Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, November 7th through Sunday, November 13th, 2022. This week, by far, the most important event is, of course, the full moon lunar eclipse. It is happening on Tuesday, November 8th, which happens to be election day in the United States. But it will be happening at 16 degrees Taurus, and it will be conjunct Uranus. So definitely big things happening there. Very unexpected shifts, lots of large shifts in general, not only for us as a collective, but also for all of us individually. There are a lot of shared themes that we're going to be experiencing with these upcoming changes, but then also, like I keep saying, this is going to look a little bit different for each and every one of us. For all of us, it will be a culmination, and there will be large, unexpected changes. But the degree of those changes and what exactly, which parts of your life they will be affecting and how, depend, of course, on your own birth chart and what that looks like and how these current energies are interacting with your energies, if that makes sense. So of course, look to your own birth chart and where this eclipse falls for more information on how this will affect you personally. But if you'd like to hear more about my interpretation of this full moon lunar eclipse, you can always head down to the description here, and I always leave timestamps there in these forecasts. So if you want to go back and listen to a particular day, or in this case, if you want to listen to my eclipse interpretation, you can head there and skip to that exact day. I wanted to mention, though, before we get into this week forecast, that of course the full moon lunar eclipse is the main event, but besides that, I did notice there are a lot of aspects with Neptune and Saturn this week. This is because Venus, Sun, and Mercury are all traveling pretty much clustered together about halfway through Scorpio, and as they do that this week, they will all three of them will square Saturn, and then immediately after they will trine Neptune. So this means, some kind of changes and delays, challenges and delays with these squares to Saturn. Maybe, realizing that we have to be more, wiser, or, we have to plan more with our resources. And then with these trines to Neptune immediately after, there may be some kind of spiritual connection or some kind of realization, some kind of intuitive process, like revealing some kind of great truth or something for all of us, or there could also be increased ability to sink into artistic creativity and things like that. So very interesting. It's very interesting when the inner planets, Sun, Mercury, and Venus in this case, connect with the outer planets, because those outer planet energies are sort of funneled into our day-to-day consciousness, more so in our short-term consciousness. And these outer planets have energies that are very strange, very weird, and they affect us more in a long term. So these are kind of like they're hard to put into words, because by their very nature, they don't have so much to do with our moment by moment experience of reality, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm explaining this well enough, but in other words, these outer planet energies they're very strange or unusual. They have to do with concepts that are abstract, or they kind of take us out of our own ego or our own identity. They allow us to see things in a much broader kind of viewpoint. So I'm not sure if that makes sense at all, but if it doesn't, just think about what I said over this week, especially on the days where we have these squares to Saturn and trines to Neptune, and you may understand what I mean a little bit more. But without further ado, let's get into the day-by-day week forecast here. So we start out Monday, November 7th with Sun is pretty much exactly halfway through Scorpio, and the moon is already in Taurus. So moon is looking pretty much full at this point in the sky. It's not exactly full yet, but we are just only one day before the full moon lunar eclipse. So things are already kind of ramping up. Things feel intense. There's that electricity in the air. We haven't had that exact eclipse, event yet, but we're in the kind of midst of it. We can feel that this event is about to happen. So already on Monday, it may be a very interesting and telling start to the week. Just pay attention to kind of what is happening, because you may, in a way, you're already beginning to experience this lunar eclipse a day before, basically. It will be definitely even more intense on Tuesday, but we're already experiencing it on Monday, if that makes sense. What this eclipse has to do, I'm just going to give a really broad overview since it's not going to happen until Tuesday, of course, but this is highlighting this axis here, the Scorpio-Taurus axis. What this axis has to do, this is the yin fixed axis, if that makes sense. So yin signs are earth and water. They are heavier in nature. They're more feminine or receptive. They like to think things through. They like to take their time. They are a little bit slower or more gradual in their processes. This is also a fixed axis, so these signs are very kind of steady, consistent. They can be a little bit stubborn or resistant to change. Scorpio, though, is interesting because Scorpio, in a way, it's consistent in how it is constantly changing. And I know that's a huge contradiction, but Scorpio is constantly adapting. So yes, we are in a fixed season, if that makes sense. Scorpio season, it's a time of consistency, but in the northern hemisphere, this is the middle of fall. So this is a time where yes, we're in the middle of a season, so there's consistent fall. We're in the middle of that kind of energy here, but fall itself is a season which corresponds to immense change. So that's where Scorpio has these traits and themes of both consistency and stubbornness, as well as immense change and evolution at the same time. Both can be true here. But anyway, so back to this axis though. So Scorpio-Taurus axis, these signs end up having to do with how we support ourselves. How do you not only address your immediate needs and wants, those more have to do with Aries and the Aries Libra axis, realizing your own identity and the other, the identity of others. Those kind of most simplistic and basic concepts, and not to diminish them by any means. These are very important and they can be very challenging and complex concepts. But, Aries and Libra is the kind of simplest stage. It's the first axis of self-realization. But immediately after that stage of self-realization comes, Taurus and Scorpio, which have to do with, okay, how are you going to support yourself in a more long-term way? Rather than just, crying out or immediately getting what you want in the moment, how do we support ourselves in a way that's a little bit more substantial, or that's more in a more kind of long-term focus? How do we, really kind of put down our roots and flesh a kind of full existence here? So what that ends up being about is, a lot of it is financial. Both Taurus and Scorpio have to do with finances, very much so. We support ourselves with money, with physical resources, but this also has to do with, other resources as well. Your time, energy, money is what I always say. Besides supporting ourselves with resources, we also support ourselves with relationships. We are humans. We are a very emotional species, in case you haven't noticed. So a lot of, how we support ourselves is through intimate relationships, family, friends, romantic partners, whatever it is. Both Taurus and Scorpio have to do with that as well. So with all these, themes having to do with how we support ourselves, having to do with Taurus and Scorpio, this is where the change is going to be. On a worldwide scale, we can especially see this with the economy, or economies, with the marketplace, with stocks. But on a more personal level, again, it's more personal. It has to do with not only our finances, but our time, energy, money, and our relationships. All of that is going to be changing. And again, I know I already said this earlier, but I will say it a million times. Look to your own birth chart. Where do Taurus and Scorpio fall for you there? Is it in a very kind of personal location for you? Do you have your ascendant or sun or moon in one or maybe both of these signs? Or, is this falling in your house of career, or and it is an axis, so is it having to do with your, let's say, your 4th house and your 10th house? So that's having to do with your work-life balance, your home life versus your work life. Or is it in your 1st house, 7th house axis? It's having to do with your interpersonal relationships and your self-expression, etc. Just kind of look to see where this falls in your chart to see how this will affect you. And if you have questions about that, again, you can always reach out to me, manic.mercurian@gmail.com. Anyway, enough of that. So but okay, so for Monday though, we can already feel this eclipse happening, is kind of what my point was. I know that was a long ramble, but we can already experience these immense changes to how we support ourselves, to our what we value, commodities and such. We can also experience this through one aspect that is happening on Monday. That will be Venus squaring Saturn. So you can see Venus is kind of ahead of this pack here, ahead of the cluster at the top of the chart. So Venus will be the first to square Saturn. I think this is especially telling because, you know, Venus has to do with commodities and how we support ourselves as well. Venus has to do with our desires too, so our interpersonal relationships, romance, pleasures, finances, etc. So Venus squaring Saturn means that there's some kind of conflict, or you know, we may be kind of we may reach some kind of sort of crisis involving how we support ourselves, our pleasure, our desires, etc. Maybe realizing that we, you know, our resources aren't as abundant as we thought they were, or we may be confronted with, you know, reality basically. We have to be a little bit more stern or specific, or more wise in how we allocate our resources and where we find pleasure, etc. So this is kind of, you know, it's sort of a rude awakening, and it's the first one. This one does look, I think, the most intense though. Venus is in a pretty hard spot. She's in detriment in Scorpio, and then now with this square to, you know, Big Daddy Saturn, it's almost like, you know, Venus, which typically bestows upon us love and pleasure and desire, not only is she kind of estranged right now, she's exiled in Scorpio, but then also she's making this harsh aspect with Saturn, which is a, you know, sort of a tough love kind of teacher, a very stern teacher. So we're, you know, we can definitely find abundance in love and prosperity right now, but not only would those things be in more obscure places right now with Venus in Scorpio, but also, you know, they may be challenged or delayed with this square to Saturn. So it's not all bad, but I would say it's challenging. I guess that's my like astrologer speak. It's not bad necessarily, but is it easy? Definitely not. Maybe a little bit more challenging. If you have a lot of detriment or fall placements, or if you have a lot of placements in Scorpio, you are already used to this energy. So so that's awesome. You won't have as hard of a time with this as maybe the rest of us. But if you have a lot more, you know, placements in domicile, or maybe kind of fiery placements, this would be a little bit more challenging for you. Okay, let's go forward to Tuesday, November 8th. So this is the day of the full moon lunar eclipse. We still have the moon, of course, in Taurus, and it will be opposing the sun. Excuse me. Let me actually go back 6 hours to show you the more exact full moon lunar eclipse. So this would be happening around 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. You can see here, not only is the moon opposing the sun, so that's what a full moon is, moon opposite sun, but we do have two other planets directly involved as well. So Uranus is conjunct the moon, both at 16 degrees Taurus, and then Mercury is at 15 degrees Scorpio, so it's conjunct the sun. So in other words, we have moon conjunct Uranus. Both of them are opposing Mercury conjunct sun. So this just adds to the intensity of the full moon lunar eclipse, because it's not just a full moon lunar eclipse, we also have two other energies directly involved. So this means not only are we having these immense changes, culminations, you know, intense kind of karmic events happening involving the reorientation of how we support ourselves, what our relationship is with our own time, energy, money, our investments, our interpersonal relationships, all of that, you know, is kind of up for change right now. Anything that hasn't been working or that you've been just putting on the back burner, that's going to come up right now, and it's going to demand to be dealt with. Okay. Not only all that though, as if all that weren't enough, we also have this full moon lunar eclipse is conjunct Uranus. So this means that this adds to the unpredictability of it. Uranus is the planet of earthquakes and of awakenings, realizations, of sudden enlightenment. So the plus side of this is that you may come across really sudden epiphanies, or, you know, your perception suddenly changing. You may have some kind of flash of intuition or knowing. You may come across information that you did not have access to before, or that you just weren't seeing before. So with Uranus, it's interesting because it's not always your physical environment that is initiating this change. It's not you like physically initiating the change. It's more just a shift in awareness or consciousness. So in other words, your situation may be similar. With this full moon lunar eclipse, that could be changing too, but part of this is not just the situation that's changing, it's your perception. Does that make sense? Even if your life is somewhat the same, maybe your perception of it has dramatically shifted overnight, sometime close to this eclipse. And really, to be totally honest, anytime like 2 weeks before this lunar eclipse, or 2 weeks after, or even maybe even greater than that, I would expect these shifts and realizations and awakenings in people, very telling dreams or thoughts or feelings. But especially on this day on Tuesday here. So just look out for that. It's not just the environment that's changing, although that is changing too because of the eclipse aspect here, but it's the understanding of reality. It's the way we are experiencing reality. And when we have these sudden realizations and epiphanies, yes, it is awesome, of course, because greater understanding is awesome. I think that's what draws us all to astrology. So if you're listening to this, I think there's a pretty high chance that that's what you want. You want greater understanding, you want awakenings, you want greater consciousness. But it can be very distressing, I think, because you may realize that something that you thought was satisfactory before in your life now suddenly isn't. You may realize that you've been putting up with something that you shouldn't, or you may realize truths that are not super kind of cozy or comfortable. And when you come across that greater understanding, suddenly you have a choice on how you will respond to these, this change in your understanding of your reality. And that's where the responsibility comes in. You have the choice to do nothing, or to continue with what you've already been doing, or but I think more often we feel obligated to take some kind of response or to change things, basically. So that's where a lot of this change comes from with Uranus. It's first the change in your awareness, and then the change that you initiate based on your free will and how your own consciousness is reacting to this greater understanding of things, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a mouthful, but yeah, as a whole, I like to keep things kind of general because again, they are different for everyone. But Scorpio Taurus has to do with how we support ourselves in its most basic sense. Uranus is adding unpredictability. Scorpio is also a very unpredictable sign as well. We have Sun and Mercury, as well as Venus in Scorpio, and then Uranus. It's Uranus's sign of exaltation is Scorpio as well. So there's a Uranus-Scorpio connection. In this case, Uranus isn't Taurus, so it's in fall here, but it's making this connection to Sun and Mercury in Scorpio in its sign of exaltation. So Scorpio, there's this shared element of unpredictability and realization, awakenings with Scorpio as well as Uranus. So expect a lot of that with this eclipse. I always say the full moons aren't just about what sign they're in, it's about the opposite sign as well, because full moons are in opposition. It's not just the moon in Taurus, it's the moon in Taurus opposing Sun in Scorpio and the interplay between the two. So that's where, that's why you hear me talk so much about the Scorpio-Taurus axis and what it represents. And then one last thing, I already kind of covered this, but I want to just touch on it one more time before I continue. Scorpio-Taurus does have to do with finances, probably more than anything else. And as I said before, that's, if you're kind of looking to world news or what's happening in the world, that would be the one kind of change, or the one sign, I would expect the most, is immense changes with our finances, commodities, etc. Yeah, and then I did mention it is election day in the United States as well, so very, very telling. There may be some very unpredicted kind of results with a lot of these elections here. Okay, and then going forward to Wednesday, November 9th, the moon will actually already leave Taurus and enter Gemini on Wednesday. I'm sorry, I just have to reset the time here, excuse me. So it looks like the moon is still in Taurus for most of the day on Wednesday, but it does enter Gemini, late in the day here, Eastern Standard Time. So we're still definitely in the midst of this intensity on Wednesday. Eclipses definitely aren't just a one-day type of event. They spill over into the days surrounding, and even the weeks surrounding the days that they fall on. So Wednesday, expect a lot of continued unpredictability and just, very interesting events or information that you may come across, things that are happening right now that are really changing your reality and how you experience your life. And I wanted to say too, I should have said for Tuesday, but for Wednesday as well, if you have any placements near this full moon lunar eclipse, so anywhere around 16 degrees of Scorpio or Taurus, as well as Aquarius or Leo as well, you may have very life-changing events happening to you right now. For the rest of us as well, we can also experience these, but it really hits in a very profound way for people who have birth placements right around this eclipse here. Okay, but for Tuesday, moon will enter Gemini late in the day. So once the moon does enter Gemini, we can experience a little bit of relief from that intensity for sure. The moon is still pretty full, but it's beginning to lose light now in the sky, so it's losing that kind of intensity here. Yeah, and it looks like your moon does enter Gemini about midday, but around noon Eastern Standard Time here. So yeah, we're still feeling like these kind of rumblings. It was sort of like an earthquake happening on Tuesday, and we're still feeling some of those kind of aftershocks on Wednesday. A lot of things have been set in motion that are going to change immensely now. But over the following, couple months or so from this week, things will be lessening in intensity now. So you can look forward to that. We've already had the second eclipse of this eclipse season, and that's it. We only have 2 eclipses for this eclipse season. That's not always the case. Sometimes we get 3. But for this, we are wrapping that up. I would encourage you to look next week for the third quarter moon that's happening, because it will still be a lot more intense than your typical third quarter moon, since it is following a full moon lunar eclipse. So that will change things dramatically next week as well. But for Wednesday, there's not a lot else going on aspect-wise. The main thing is the moon leaving Taurus and entering Gemini, so we get a little bit of relief. Gemini is a lot of it's a very light sign and kind of carefree sign. It is an air sign. It's mutable, so there's a lot of, kind of just being able to be detached and not take things so seriously. So I think that's kind of a nice break right after all this really heavy intensity. There's still kind of that electricity in the air. There's still those kind of rumblings happening in our lives, but we can at least maybe more easily take a step back and, not take everything too seriously. Also with Gemini's adaptability, we can be maybe a little bit more open or adaptable to these changes as well. So I think that's kind of a perfect sign to have the moon in, just following this full moon lunar eclipse here for Wednesday. Okay, and then going forward to Thursday, November 10th. Moon continues through Gemini, of course, so we continue to kind of embrace those themes that I mentioned for Wednesday. We do have 2 aspects happening on Thursday though, so that would be Mercury. Mercury will square Saturn, so now the intellectual energy is, I think, kind of reaching this point of realization of challenges or delays, or maybe a need for greater conservation of resources, maybe being a little bit more strict with our time, our energy, our money, etc. We could also reach constraints brought on by technology, social media, or brought on by group responsibilities. All that, these themes I'm describing are kind of Aquarian themes, and with Saturn in Aquarius, that can be the source for a lot of these challenges or delays. There could also be delays with technology itself as well. Besides Mercury squaring Saturn today, we also have Venus trining Neptune. This is a really beautiful aspect, especially because they are both in water signs. Yes, Venus is in detriment in Scorpio, so it can be maybe more challenging or more unusual to find our pleasure, our desire, etc. But with Venus trining Neptune here, Neptune is in domicile in Pisces, so there's this really strong kind of spiritual energy, or creative energy, this energy that encourages us to really experience deep emotion or intuition, spirituality, Neptune is sort of hard to explain, I think, but by its very nature, that really makes a lot of sense because by its very nature, it is obscure. It kind of slips through your fingers. It's having to do with having to do with collective consciousness and things like that. So with Venus making this trine here, there may be, this may be a really good day for diving into spiritual, intuition or creativity. Maybe just kind of looking within yourself and gaining insight or inspiration, gaining some kind of peace or feeling that may be necessary for stability or necessary for making a change as well. But yes, with both of these happening in water signs have to do with emotion and spirituality. So really, really beautiful for intuition, spirituality, creativity, etc. Going forward to Friday, November 11th, the moon will move into Cancer late in the day, Eastern Standard Time. That will change things dramatically and bring a lot of water. So, not only Venus, Mercury, and Sun are in Scorpio, which is water, but then also Moon will soon be in Cancer today. So lots of watery energy. Also, once the moon does enter Cancer, it will begin to come within orb of a trine to the sun. So that's really excellent because whenever the moon and the sun trine one another, we experience a kind of great stability or peace. Typically speaking, everyone is usually in a kind of slightly better mood. I know that's kind of a crude way to say it, but it's sort of true here because we just experience that stability. There's a really easy flow between the sun and the moon's energies when they're in the same element and when they are kind of about to trine one another. And then again, Scorpio and Cancer are both water signs, so again we're still dealing with those themes of really intense or heavy emotion or that's kind of the main thing I think that we experience water signs through is really deep emotion. But from that emotion comes creativity and intuition and spirituality as well. With that deep feeling, comes a certain kind of knowingness that can be cultivated, I think. Also on Friday, the sun does square Saturn. So again, there may be some kind of constraints or delays, challenges, realizations that we may have to be more practical or more conserving of our resources. Saturday, November 12th, Mercury trines Neptune. So this is really interesting to me because I'm always kind of perplexed or captivated by Mercury in Scorpio. It's actually a very kind of underrated placement. Mercury in Scorpio is very strong because not only are our intellects really firing off when we are experiencing Mercury in Scorpio, we're very able to analyze things and observe and rationalize, analyze. But also, Scorpio being so intuitive and having Mercury in this very intuitive sign as well allows us to not only analyze the facts and the data and observe, but also to access this more kind of psychic sense as well. So now with Mercury in Scorpio trining Neptune, it funnels in this kind of creative and spiritual energy of Neptune in Pisces, this collective consciousness or this tapping into something greater. I know none of these words really are going to accurately portray this energy. I think by its very nature, it's pretty much impossible to do. But if you pay attention to what happens on Saturday, November 12th, and you will understand what I'm saying, if that makes sense. You'll understand kind of it's just easier to slip into this more kind of psychic state when we have aspects like this and when we have this abundance of water placements that we do here for Saturday. So really, I always like to kind of analyze, what to best do with your weekend. And this does look like, a good time for maybe going out and doing something. We don't have as much of the intense heaviness that we did earlier in this week. Everything was really hitting the fan, like I always say, right around the eclipse. So we're a few days past that now. So things have leveled out just a tiny bit where I think we can relax to some degree and enjoy ourselves a little bit more. The trine between the sun and the moon that's beginning to happen, really helps with this a lot. We may be a little bit more emotional, which can be, good or bad for enjoying ourselves for a weekend, for example. But But yeah, it looks like a good day to go out to do something, or resting and relaxing at home looks really great too. Water signs can definitely do both, I think. They do have to do with resting or being alone, but they also love to connect with other people. These are the most emotional signs, after all. Going to Sunday, November 13th. Moon is in Cancer still, and with Moon in Cancer, Moon represents our emotions, and Cancer is the most emotional sign it has to deal with. It has to do with emotions themselves. So, and then combining that with Sun, Mercury, and Venus in Scorpio, we're definitely very aware of how we feel right now. So that I think that can be really excellent for just having that kind of emotional clarity. If you look at the chart now, you can see all these blue lines that are indicating trines, and you can see that there's really a grand trine forming. It's pretty abundantly clear, I think. It's not exactly a dead on a grand trine, but it is pretty dang close. We have Sun at 21 degrees Scorpio, Mercury at 24 degrees Scorpio, Neptune at 22 degrees Pisces, and then Moon will be crossing over the early 20s degrees of Cancer. Moon travels so fast. So basically Sunday we do have a grand water trine happening between these kind of several planets here. So again, this is really excellent for really deep emotional confidence, knowing exactly how you feel, which can be really great. It doesn't always solve the problem, or you still may have some kind of big challenge to face, but you at least know how you feel about it. And I think that kind of gives you a running start, because we don't always know how we feel. But also, from that deep emotion, from that really strong, stable emotion that we're experiencing on Sunday, from that again comes the kind of spiritual connection, or the intuition, the creativity. So this looks like a really great day for kind of doing almost anything, really, for going out and doing something, being active. Even productivity would be good if you have a lot of work to do. I think this could be a really great energy for maybe seeing things from a different way, or just kind of having some kind of fun creativity or playfulness. Maybe you can use that to increase your productivity or your efficiency, or at least your enjoyment of what you're doing. But also just for whether it be resting or going out, having fun, having a good time. Any of that looks really strongly supported by this grand trine. It's very versatile, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Lastly, on Sunday we do have, besides this grand water trine, we do have one main aspect that would be Venus sextiling Pluto. So Venus at 26 degrees Scorpio makes this aspect to Pluto at 26 degrees Capricorn. This is kind of interesting. So Venus, again, is in detriment. It's making all these connections when, she's making all these conversations with these other planets. She's initiating these sort of communications, but she's doing so in a strange way. She's not really herself in Scorpio. And so when she makes the sextile to Pluto, with sextiles, they are very much a harmonious aspect, but the sextile is kind of the weakest of Ptolemy's. I think he calls them major aspects. I forget what the exact terminology is, but of these kind of main aspects that I talk about here, the major aspects, the sextile is the most minor of the major aspects. So it is definitely very strong in the sense that we can, it's very tangible. But a sextile is not consistently tangible. It may kind of come and go, if that makes sense. It may be triggered by an event or another aspect. So depending on where this falls in your chart, if you have placements around 26 degrees of Scorpio or Capricorn, you will definitely experience this. This is kind of tricky. So Pluto is kind of like the destroyer. It destroys whatever is not good or just or efficient or truthful, etc. And it brings about it conjures up a lot of darkness, I think. A lot of insecurity, or I don't know. It brings up things that have to be dealt with to find greater stability. This is a malefic, so it's kind of like a troublemaker, sort of. And with Venus and Scorpio making this aspect, it's almost like we're finding pleasure or abundance, but in a really kind of dark or unexpected way. We're finding it in an obscure place. This is a very bittersweet type of aspect, I think. We may be maybe we've kind of successfully adapted to some of these challenges or constraints that have come about this week, and so we're learning to find a kind of bittersweet acceptance or pleasure, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I see this really, and the signs that these aspect is happening in, I think, support this as well. Scorpio and Capricorn are both signs that are, the energies are very difficult to deal with. If you like, in other words, if you yourself have a lot of placements in Scorpio or Capricorn, you're used to dealing with a lot of pressure. You're used to dealing with very challenging circumstances. So with this aspect happening here, I just think that we're kind of learning to make the most of maybe some a time of kind of a little bit of hard pressure here with this aspect here. But again, overall, we do have this grand water trine supporting us. Water signs usually correspond to an ending, though. So there may have just been a kind of huge event on Tuesday and then some kind of ending that's happening over the weekend. So that's what I have for you this week. Definitely a lot of heavy stuff going on this week, but all of that will change next week. We have two planets, Venus and Mercury, entering Sagittarius next week, so there's definitely a huge shift in the just the outlook of everything. Sagittarius is such an optimistic sign, and it follows Scorpio, which is such a pessimistic sign. So there's this huge shift in just seeing things in a more humorous or positive kind of way. So you can maybe look forward to that with these placements in Sagittarius. Next week is also the last full week of Sun in Scorpio as well. So in other words, basically this cluster of Venus, Mercury, and Sun are all preparing to enter Sagittarius. So that will, of course, be a major shift going on. So I hope this forecast helps you or is interesting. And again, always look to where these things fall in your chart to see how this will affect you personally. But I hope this helps you, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Take care.